It started with a dare. Jake, my best friend since childhood, had always been the reckless one. I should have known better than to listen to him. But when you're 22, drunk on cheap beer, and trying to impress a girl, logic isn't exactly your strongest trait. Midnight, the old cemetery on the edge of town. There's an unmarked grave that cries, Jake whispered, his voice thick with excitement. The others laughed, but there was something about the way he said it. Something that made my stomach twist. "You're full of shit," I said, shaking my head. "Then prove me wrong," he grinned. And so there I was, flashlight in hand, standing at the rusted gate of Black Hollow Cemetery. The place had been abandoned for decades, the headstones cracked and leaning, names barely visible under decades of moss and decay. The trees loomed overhead, their skeletal branches twisting like gnarled fingers reaching for the sky. I stepped inside. The air was different here, thicker, colder. The kind of cold that seeped into your bones. Not the crisp autumn chill I'd felt outside the gate. It smelled damp, like earth that had been disturbed. Jake and the others stayed behind, watching from the safety of the road. They joked, but their voices were distant, muffled, like the night itself was swallowing them. The unmarked grave was supposed to be in the center, near the statue of the weeping angel. That's what the legend said. An unknown soul, buried without a name, cursed to cry at midnight for the life stolen from them. I didn't believe in ghosts, but as I moved deeper into the cemetery, every step felt heavier. The wind had died down, no crickets, no rustling leaves, just silence. And then, a sound, soft at first, like a whisper carried on the wind, then clearer, a sob, low, broken, filled with something I couldn't quite place. Grief? Pain? I swallowed hard and swung my flashlight around. Nothing but rows of tombstones and tangled weeds. The weeping angel was just ahead, its stone face streaked with age and rain. And at its feet, a grave. No headstone, no name. Just a patch of dirt, slightly sunken, like someone had disturbed it. The sobbing grew louder. I turned around, expecting to see Jake messing with me. But there was no one there. And yet, something was breathing behind me. I froze. The breath on my neck was slow, deliberate. Too close. The kind that raises every hair on your body, makes your skin prickle like something unseen is reaching for you. I spun around, flashlight shaking in my grip. Nothing. Just rows of crumbling tombstones. Twisted tree shadows stretching across the ground like skeletal fingers. But the air. God, the air felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like the moment before storm, when the world holds its breath. The sobbing hadn't stopped. It was coming from the grave. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on dead leaves. My pulse slammed against my ribs. "Hello?" My voice barely broke above a whisper. The crying hitched, turning into sharp, shuddering gasps. It wasn't just random noise. It sounded real, like someone buried beneath the dirt, gasping for air, pleading. I swallowed, my throat dry as dust. "Is someone—" A hand grabbed my wrist. I nearly dropped the flashlight. I yanked back, heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. But there was nothing there. Nothing. The dirt at the unmarked grave shifted. I staggered back, breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The ground didn't just settle. It moved. Something underneath was pressing against it. Something trying to get out. The sobbing turned into a wail. Long. Agonized. I should have run. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to get the hell out of there. But I couldn't. My feet wouldn't move. Then, the whisper came. "Help me." It wasn't from behind me. It wasn't from the trees. It was from beneath the dirt. A scream built in my throat, but I swallowed it down. My hands trembled as I aimed the flashlight at the grave. The surface of the earth rippled, tiny cracks forming in the loose soil, like something was clawing its way up. I heard footsteps. I turned, expecting to see Jake. Instead, the weeping angel statue was closer than before. That wasn't possible. I had been standing at least 10 feet away from it. But now, the edge of its stone robe nearly brushed my shoulder. I could see every crack, every rain-worn detail in its frozen, sorrowful face. And the worst part? The angel's hands had moved. Before, they had covered its eyes. But now they were reaching us toward me. The air turned ice-cold. The sobbing beneath the ground twisted into something else. A rasping, choking sound, like whoever was buried there was drowning in soil. "Don't let them take me." The voice was clearer this time, desperate, terrified. I stumbled backward, breath coming in panicked gasps. The flashlight flickered. For the first time in my life, I prayed. Then something grabbed my ankle. Not a hand. A root. It snaked around my foot, dry and gnarled. But it wasn't just growing. It was moving. Wrapping tight, pulling me toward the grave. I kicked, my boot scraping against rock and loose dirt. Another root curled around my other ankle. The ground was swallowing me. The flashlight dropped from my grip, rolling across the earth. And in its beam, I saw something rise from the unmarked grave. A shape, thin, hollow, wrong. It had no face, just empty black pits where eyes should have been. Its mouth stretched too wide, as if frozen in a silent, eternal scream. And it was reaching for me. I gasped, thrashing against the roots, constricting my legs. The thing rising from the grave moved unnaturally, its limbs jerking like a broken puppet. The sobbing had stopped, replaced by a deep, gurgling sound, like something choking on mud. The flashlight lay on its side, its weak beam barely illuminating the figure. Its skin, if you could call it that, was stretched too thin, almost translucent, the hollow pits where its eyes should have been locked onto me, as if it could see straight into my soul. I kicked harder, the roots tightening, like they had a mind of their own. My fingers clawed at the dirt, desperate to pull myself free. Then it spoke. "They buried me alive." The voice was hoarse, raw, filled with something beyond pain, beyond rage. It was despair, thick and suffocating. My stomach twisted. No, this wasn't real. This was some drunken hallucination, a trick of my exhausted mind. But the thing before me didn't care whether I believed or not. It knew. They left me here. No name, no stone, forgotten. The roots dug deeper, pulling me toward the open grave. The earth beneath me was no longer solid. I was sinking. The dirt swallowed my fingers as I struggled, my breath coming in sharp, panicked gulps. Then, footsteps. Heavy, running footsteps. "Jason!" Jake's voice cut through the night like a blade. "What the hell is happening?" I barely managed to turn my head. He stood at the edge of the graveyard, flashlight trembling in his grip, eyes wide with terror. "Help me!" I gasped, fighting against the pull. Jake hesitated. For a second I thought he was going to run. But then he lunged forward, grabbing my arms and pulling with everything he had. The roots screamed. A sound I will never forget. A shrill, ear-piercing wail that didn't belong to anything human. The creature in the grave lunged. Its clawed fingers scraped against my leg, leaving a burning sensation in their wake. My body jerked as Jake yanked me free. the roots snapping like brittle bones. We collapsed onto the damp ground, gasping. But the thing in the grave, it didn't stop. It was climbing out. The weeping angel statue stood behind it, shadowed in the dim light, its outstretched hands frozen in silent grief. "Run!" Jake yelled. I didn't need to be told twice. We bolted. My legs burned, lungs screaming for air as we sprinted through the graveyard. Behind us, I heard the unmistakable sound of dirt shifting, of something crawling. We reached the rusted gate, slamming into it. Jake fumbled with the latch, cursing. Then the poor crying got started again, but this time it wasn't a plea, it was a heart warning. I turned just for a second, and in that moment, I saw it. The truth. The entire cemetery was shifting, the ground rising and falling like breath. The graves, they weren't empty. Hands, hundreds of them, pushed up through the soil. Some reached for us. Others clawed at their own graves, as if trying to keep something inside. And in the middle of it all, standing over its own unmarked grave, the source, nameless thingish, whispered one final time, "You let them take me." The gate burst open. Jake shoved me through, and we ran. We didn't stop, not until the cemetery was far behind us, swallowed by the night. But even now, as I sit in my room, lights on, door locked, trying to convince myself it's over, I can still hear the crying. And I know it's getting closer. We didn't stop running until we reached the main road. My chest burned, every breath like fire in my throat. Jake bent over, hands on his knees, gasping. The night was still, too still, like the world was waiting. We can't just leave it," Jake panted. I whipped around, my whole body trembling. "Are you insane? Did you not see that thing?" He swallowed hard, nodding. "I did. But Jason, it knows you." I felt it too. That thing in the grave, the nameless one, it wasn't finished with me. The crying was still there, distant but constant. A horrible, broken wail. And beneath it, something worse. A whisper, threading through the night like a cold breath against my ear. "You let them take me." I clenched my jaw. "What does it want from me?" Jake shook his head. "I don't know. But if we leave now, do you really think it'll stop?" I didn't. Something had followed me out of that graveyard. The cold was still in my bones, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against my back. Jake grabbed my shoulder. "We end this. Tonight." I should have told him he was crazy. I should have walked away. But deep down, I knew he was right. So we turned back. The cemetery was waiting for us. The rusted gate groaned open, the air inside colder than before. My breath fogged in front of me. The flashlight trembled in my hand as we stepped inside. The graves were still, silent. But the angel statue, it had moved again, no longer reaching forward. Now its head was tilted downward, as if watching something below. I followed its gaze. The unmarked grave. The dirt had shifted again, the earth fresh and loose. Jake whispered, "What now?" I didn't know, but I could feel something. Someone standing behind me, close enough that if I turned, I'd see it. I forced myself to speak. "Who are you?" The crying stopped. The night stretched, silent and waiting. Then, the voice. "You let them take me." A gust of wind rushed through the cemetery, cold and biting. The trees groaned, their branches twisting like grasping hands. I turned, and it was there. The thing that had crawled out of the grave. But now I could see it clearly. It wasn't just a hollowed-out corpse. It wasn't just a ghost. It was someone I knew. The realization hit me like a punch to the chest. The sunken, eyeless face, the torn, withered clothes. This wasn't just some nameless spirit. This was Daniel. My breath caught. My legs went weak. Daniel, my childhood best friend, the one who had gone missing 10 years ago. No, it couldn't be. Daniel had disappeared on a summer afternoon. One moment we were playing near the woods. The next he was gone. They searched for weeks, but they never found his body. Because they had buried him here. Alive. His voice was nothing more than a whisper carried by the wind. They took me that night, buried me here. No one looked, no one heard me. The roots, the voices, the weeping angel. It wasn't just a haunting, it was a warning. This place wasn't a graveyard, it was a prison. And something worse, had buried Daniel here. Jake grabbed my arm. Jason, we have to go. But I couldn't move. Daniel was still there, his hollow face inches from mine. His fingers reached out, brushing my wrist. The moment he touched me, I know it's so a memory that wasn't mine. Daniel, kicking, screaming as strangers held him down. The sharp scent of damp earth filling his nose. Hands shoveling dirt over his body, his own muffled screams drowning beneath the soil. And standing over it all, the white weeping angel. Not a statue, not a marker of grief, a watcher, a jailer. The wind howled through the graveyard. The statue's face, motionless stone, seemed almost sad. Daniel's grip tightened. His voice was different now, urgent. Set me free. I looked at Jake. We had to dig. My hands hit the dirt first. I didn't stop to think, didn't stop to breathe. I just dug. Jake was right beside me, his fingers clawing into the loose soil. The earth was damp, cold, and disturbingly fresh, as if someone had just buried him. Again, Daniel didn't move. He just watched, silent, waiting. The wind picked up, howling through the graveyard like a chorus of unseen voices. The weeping angel loomed over us, its shadow stretching long across the ground. Then my fingers hit something. Not wood, not stone. Fabric. Jake sucked in a breath. Oh my God! We dug faster. The dirt crumbled away, revealing what was underneath. Ali body. But it wasn't just bones. It was whole. Daniel's body, untouched by time, by decay. His clothes were the same as the day he vanished, his face frozen in an expression of terror. I choked on my own breath. This wasn't natural. This was Pushun. Wrong. The air grew thick, heavy with something unseen. The shadows around us deepened, stretching unnaturally, swallowing the edges of the graveyard. Jake's voice wavered. Jason, we shouldn't be here. But it was too late. Daniel moved. His real body, his chest rose in a shallow, ragged breath. His lips parted, and a sound, weak, hoarse, escaped. Help. Me? I reached for him, but the moment my fingers touched his arm, the statue screamed. Not a sound, not a noise, a feeling, a piercing, unbearable pressure in my skull, like something was trying to split my mind in two. My vision blurred. The ground beneath us shifted. The cemetery wasn't a cemetery anymore. The graves were holes, empty pits, waiting. The angel's shadow loomed over us. And for the first time, I understood. We weren't supposed to dig him up. Daniel wasn't just buried. He was sealed. Something else was in that grave with him. Something that didn't want to stay buried. Jake grabbed my arm. We have to stop. We have to put it back. Daniel's hollow figure stood over his own body, his expression unreadable. Then he spoke. Bury me again, or take my place. The wind howled. The earth beneath me cracked. The choice wasn't mine anymore. Something unseen pulled at me, dragging me down. The roots coiled around my wrists, my ankles, pulling me toward the grave. The weeping angel loomed closer, its stoned face smiling. Jake screamed my name. I barely heard him. The grave swallowed me whole. And the last thing I saw was Daniel standing in the moonlight. Whole, alive, free, and me buried in his place.